So thank you for joining us for Tough Texas Turf, an online class about lawn care here in North Texas. And this class is brought to you by Tarrant Regional Water District. Before we start the presentation, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Tarrant Regional Water District. So we are your local raw water suppliers. One of our main missions is water supply. And so what that means is we maintain the surface reservoirs or lakes that you see here on the map. And those orange lines that you see connecting the lakes are our pipelines that we maintain, where we pump water that you see there from our lakes over in East Texas up through those pipelines to Tarrant County. And at that point in time, that's raw water that hasn't been treated from those lakes. And we pump that water to all of our cities in Tarrant County. And then those cities treat that water to drinking water standards. And then they pump that drinking water out to everyone, to their homes and businesses within that city through their city pipes. And so that's how your local water supply works if you live in Tarrant County. We also do flood control. And so that's maintaining the levees and floodplains and things like that around the Trinity River to make sure it doesn't flood. And then we also do recreation. So we maintain the Trinity trails, and there are also parks associated with many of our lakes and like the Trinity River, recreational activities like boating and fishing and swimming and all of those great things that come with a lake. So now that I've told you a little bit about TRWD, I'm just going to talk a little bit about why we're talking about lawn care today. Um, Conservation is one of our most important water supply strategies at Tarrant Regional Water District. We are set to take care of the population in the coming future in terms of their water needs. And our population here in Tarrant County is set to double within the next 50 years or so. And so what that means is that we need to be more smart about the water that we have now, so that we can continue to provide water for people in the future. And so SaveTarrantWater.com is our water conservation website for and tons of different water conservation resources and programs on there. You can sign up for free weekly watering advice that is for lawns, that is customized to your location. We maintain weather stations that look at rainfall and evapotranspiration and temperature and things like that, and come up with your amount that you need to water your lawn every week, and that's sent to your email or your cell phone, whichever you choose, free of cost. We also have free sprinkler evaluations for Tarrant County residents. So you can go to SaveTarrantWater.com and sign up for a licensed irrigator to come to your home and take a look at your sprinkler system and answer your questions about it, let you know if you have any leaks, let you know if you have any inefficiencies, tell you how many gallons you are using per minute or per zone whenever you run your sprinkler system, and can help you with the sprinkler controller if you need help with that as well. We also have a calendar of events and classes just like this one. We have water saving tips and videos. There's a YouTube channel, Save Tarrant Water YouTube. And so there are classes just like this one over there that you can look at with tons of different water conservation, landscaping type of videos. And we also have a newsletter. It's a monthly newsletter where we just talk about our programs and events and things that are going on for that month. And we also do a monthly prize drawing with fun conservation prizes. So today we're going to talk to you about your lawn, and how to keep it green and how to keep it healthy, but making sure that you're being smart with your water use. And so this is a part of a series that is lasting all the way until October of online classes all about Texas home landscaping, specifically for our area, North Texas. And you can find out more about that on SaveTarrantWater.com. Go take a look and see if there are more classes or topics that interest you. And lastly, just a little bit of information for you. You can go to your question box and ask a question for our speaker today throughout the presentation, and she will get to the questions at the end of the presentation. You can also download a brochure that's in the control panel, so you should have a little area that says handouts, and there's a lawn care handout that you can take and download as a PDF that has much of the information that you'll learn today in case you want to recap or learn more about it. And I am Heather Bass. I'm with Tarrant Regional Water District in the Conservation Department, and I'm your moderator today. And our speaker is Gail Donaldson, and she is an irrigation and lawn expert. I'm going to talk a little bit about her while I allow her to begin sharing her screen. So we can switch over to her presentation. Okay, Gail, you should be ready to go ahead and start with your screen sharing. And let me see if I can pull up your bio.
Can you see it?
Yes, I do
Okay,
see it.
good.
I'm sorry, I accidentally closed your bio, but I have it now. Okay, so today we have Gail Donaldson. She is retired now, but she's the former water conservation manager for the city of Allen. And she has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in horticulture and education from Texas A&M Commerce. Before she worked with the city of Allen, she was the associate dean for the horticulture program at Richland College in Dallas. And then prior to that, she was program coordinator for horticulture programs at Northeastern Junior College in Colorado. And she was also the horticulture extension agent for the Golden Plains region for Colorado State University. So you can tell Gail knows her stuff, and she knows a lot about lawn care and horticulture, as well as water conservation and how to use your resources wisely. So Gail, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can begin your presentation.
All right, thank you very much. And I want you to know this is going to be really, really quick. So jot your questions down and I'll try to answer them at the end. 45 minutes is not enough to give you Turf 101, but I'm going to try my best to get it done in that short time. So basically, here's the thing. We are wanting, maybe if I can get, I'm not getting it. There we go. All right. So we all want green grass, and that is the whole thing. And why people usually tune in to turfgrass talks is that they want this green, lush lawn. So how are we going to get that? Typically what happens in come February, March, the first days that start warming up, we go out there and we get out that mower. And so we start mowing. And then we get out the fertilizer and maybe even some other issues too, weed control, things like that. Then we turn on those sprinklers because all we want to do is we want to get that green grass. So we mow, we fertilize, we water, and we keep on doing this over and over and over again. And typically it starts as soon as it warms up in March. Well, I kind of call this insanity because those type things don't necessarily green your lawn up. So you have to know a little bit about the turf grass itself to understand your best practices. So when we get into lawn care in particular, you want to know things about what is going to make a healthy lawn. What is the keys to it? And the key, the big key, is in order to have a healthy turf and root system, you're going to have healthy soil. And what does that mean? And healthy turf, you're going to have the right turf grass species planted in the right environment. And I see this 9 times out of 10 where people are trying to grow grass in areas that's not conducive to grass growing. So when I say proper environment, that's what I mean is it in full sun? Is it shade? What's your soil type? What's the depth? What's the condition? And what are the water needs of that particular grass species that you're wanting to grow? There are some areas in North Texas where the depth of soil is only about 2 inches. We have a shale condition that might be 2 inches under. 2 inches depth is not quite good enough for grass. You want to get that root depth as deep as it possibly will grow. And it is all dependent upon the species. Each one is a little bit different. Then the last thing is proper maintenance. And I see this being the problem with most turfgrass lawns, is that it's not being maintained properly. So we're going to kind of get into all of these items, and I know it probably will be pretty fast. The first thing is in your soil. A lot of our areas have this very, very tight clay. This particular clay soil profile is called Houston Black clay. It is the state soil, so yippee for us. But I will tell you, it is very, very, it gets compacted very, very easy. And so you've got to know that soil and what it is you have. Now, there are a few places in your area in Tarrant County in particular, and Denton County, where there are some sand conditions. So there's a big difference between sand and clay when it comes to growing your turf, and also how you maintain it with watering. Now, one thing that you can do for either one of the turfs, whether it's clay or it's sand, is use compost as an amendment to the soil. It kind of helps to break up the clay, and then it helps to hold moisture for that sand situation. So let's talk about turfgrass species. Now, if you're not from this region, you may not know this information, but if you look at this map, you see these are adaptation for different cool season and warm season grasses. Where that red line is, everything below that red line that's right in here is for warm season grasses. Everything above that red line and here is cool season grasses. And then you have what's called a transition zone. And this transition zone is something that makes cool season grasses difficult to live in here, makes warm season grasses difficult to live in here. However, you will find them in both areas, but typically in our area in particular, our summers are just made way too hot for cool season grasses. So when we're talking about the species, warm season grasses are Bermuda, St. Augustine, zoysia, buffalo. Then there's some others that you use in South Texas like centipede and seashore paspalum. But mainly we use Bermuda, St. Augustine, and zoysia in this area. Cool season grasses include ryegrass, fescue, bluegrass, bentgrass, and others. And if you're from those northern areas, you are used to ryegrass, fescue, and bluegrass in particular, and bentgrass if you do golf, because that's usually what they use the greens as bentgrass. It is a total different grass. They grow differently. They have different requirements. And so that is the first key, is to make sure you're growing the correct species for our area. And warm season grasses are the ones that you want to go for. Now, when we talk about those warm season varieties, Bermuda grass has a very thin blade. It's very aggressive, but you need to know that it needs full sun, 7+ hours. So this needs full sun. If it is shaded by a tree, a fence, or anything else, Bermuda is not going to survive. Buffalo is the same way. Buffalo grass also needs that full sun environment. It is thin bladed, it needs the full sun, but buffalo does not make a great lawn grass here simply because it doesn't tolerate the type management structures we do by watering it, fertilizing it, mowing it, and keeping it below 4 to 6 inches, because a lot of HOA areas, they want that manicured lawn. Buffalo is difficult to do a manicured lawn with. St. Augustine has a wide blade. It is shade tolerant. And zoysia has two different ones. It has a thin and a wide bladed one. They are shade tolerant. But shade tolerant, one thing you need to know is that it still requires 4 hours of sunlight. So it still needs some sun. And the one thing about buffalo grass, it really needs to be left out where it can just manage on its own. Buffalo grass is better in those very high acreage sites where you're not constantly mowing and fertilizing and things. Buffalo doesn't like any herbicides on it. And so it's one of those things that trying to manage in a home lawn situation with neighbors on either side that may have St. Augustine or zoysia, it's going to be very difficult to maintain your buffalo because those grasses will invade your buffalo grass. And then, so it's just not a good management strategy for buffalo, even though it's drought tolerant. Now, I will tell you, Bermuda is just as drought tolerant as buffalo grass. So if you're going to use that, I would rather see you do Bermuda grass, which is very, very, it can be managed very, very well in our home lawn situations, but has to have full sun. So cross out buffalo. Let's don't use that. Let's just concentrate on Bermuda, St. Augustine, and zoysia. Now, one thing you need to know about warm season, and I want you to remember this, you might even jot it down, is because I'm going to show you something later on in this presentation. The optimum growing temperatures for warm season grass is 88 to 92 degrees. When the temperatures are below 70, growth pretty much stops. And so keep that in mind, because when we go into these management things, you're going to have to realize that a lot of things that I talk about is really dependent upon the temperature when you do things. A lot of times people look at calendars, but we don't want to look at the calendars. We want to look at the temperatures, because that's going to be a big difference on how well you manage your landscape on your lawn. Now, shade conditions. Here's a prime example where we've got a huge live oak tree in this park. Now, notice the shade line. You can pretty much see the shade line, and there's no grass growing in it. We have a whole lot of lawn situations that I run across on a daily basis that have got mature trees in the lawn, and they're mad because they cannot get grass to grow underneath them. Now, I will tell you, this deep shade right here is not even enough sunlight for those shade tolerant grasses. And the best thing in this situation is exactly what they've done. They have done a ring of mulch. Notice it's not caked up against the tree. It's just in that entire shade line. And that is usually the best thing you can do, because you don't have anything competing under that tree, and you're allowed that tree to get its maximum growth and its maximum potential by not allowing things to grow underneath it. Now, everybody has a backyard situation where they've got these privacy fences. This is the other thing where I see they've got privacy fences and they cannot get grass to grow. But notice where the lawn chairs are. They're sitting in the shade. Well, we like the shade because in days like today where it's very, very hot, sitting in the shade is the best thing to do. In this situation, if this was Bermuda grass, you would not have any Bermuda grass growing in any of this area because it simply would not get enough sunlight. Now, your zoysia and your St. Augustine, which this could be, might be able to grow and tolerate depending on the orientation of this backyard. As long as it does get 4 hours sometimes during the day, then you're probably going to get it to grow right up next to the fence. Where I see problems is in these big two-story houses that are in neighborhoods where they're two-story on either side, and they've got this, the way that they're oriented, they only get about 2 to 3 hours of sun at the very most, sometimes 4, but it becomes a problem with grass. And most of the time the home builders put down Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is not going to live in this even the first year because there's just too much shade. Here is a suggestion. Some neighbors got together. They didn't have anything but mud growing between these. And so they went together on this project and put a nice crushed granite pathway to get to the gates and used a ground cover. This is a shade tolerant ground cover. It kind of looks like grass. Doesn't have to have a whole lot of management. And then there were some shrubs towards the end here. Now, what this is, if we look at it close, this is what's called dwarf mondo grass. And dwarf mondo grass is very shade tolerant. It's not very aggressive, so that means if you want a thick stand like this, you have to plant it pretty thick. You can't plant them a foot apart. You're going to plant them pretty close together to get a thick stand. Now, dwarf mondo does need water. It is one of the things that you will have to water it. And so if you did something like this, you would want to make sure that your sprinkler system matches those areas. So it matches those areas to where you're not spraying on that crushed granite area and you're spraying on those, or you converted that to drip and you have an underground drip system that is watering that. That would be the best way to manage it. Now, another situation was on another home. They went together and they put a different variety of grass. So even though they've got the gate back there, they didn't put any stepping stones or anything. This particular variety is called Xeon. It is a very thin bladed zoysia grass. Again, needs 4 hours of sunlight. So you have to know whether or not you have enough sunlight. The best way to test is to get one of the really inexpensive solar lights, like the pathway lights, and go put it in the area where you're wanting to do grass. If that solar light will not maintain a light within 2 weeks, you do not have 4 hours a day, and that is the least expensive way to know whether or not you have enough light for that 4 hours of sunlight for Xeon, because that's exactly what those little solar lights require, is about 4 hours. Now, if you're going to have a whole lawn of Bermuda grass, then this is what you would want to be looking at. Notice there's no trees, there's no fences, there's no shade whatsoever. Think about the golf course and the golf course greens. Most of those are not in the shade, they're in the full sun. So you need to think about, if you want a manicured Bermuda grass lawn, you need to have full sun everywhere in order to manage it. Now, I've had a lot of people tell me my grass is dead. This is not dead. It is called dormant. This is basically what Bermuda grass is going to look like in the wintertime, dormant Bermuda grass. And it basically comes back once the temperatures reach that. Remember what I said? You know, it has to be above 70 in order for it to start greening up. So it's going to stay that way. Once 70 degrees hit, you're going to start seeing that starts coming out of dormancy and becomes green. Palisade zoysia. This is one of the best home lawn zoysias out there. It will work in sun. It will work in that 4 hours of sun where you have those shady areas. And it is not a real high maintenance zoysias. That Xeon is a little bit more high maintenance. Xeon is best mowed with a real tight mower and mowing it short. And we'll get into mowing heights here in a minute. St. Augustine grass is another thick bladed, but it'll tolerate shade, but it still needs 4 hours. And looking at this, you can kind of see where the sun is hitting it. But I will tell you that this particular lawn does get about 6 to 7 hours of full sun, but it does have shade for a long time as well. It works very well. That's a close-up of that same lawn, very thick, very healthy. Now, people send me pictures sometimes, and this is what I get, and they want to know what kind of grass they have. This right here, basically, they don't have any grass. This is a picture that's probably in February or March, just based on the weeds that are present in this lawn. And I do not see any grass growing. If there's grass, it might be Bermuda grass. It's still dormant, but it has a tremendous amount of weeds. This one has a little bit more grass, but still quite a bit of weeds. When you have predominantly 70 to 80% weeds and 30 to 20% of grass, sometimes it's better to start over than it is to try to manage this and get it back into optimum health. It's totally up to you. It's called expense and how much you want to spend, because sometimes doing it from the very beginning can be quite expensive, but realize this is an instant lawn. Now, it isn't just going in there and scraping this off. That's what a lot of people like to do, scrape it off, or they just use weed killers and then they throw it new sod down on top. You really, if you're going to put the money into a new turf grass, you want to make sure that that soil is healthy to survive, so that turf grass will survive. And the way to do that in our clay area is basically removing all of that vegetation. And then you are going to rototill, or you're going to do something to turn this soil, and usually add a compost amendment to it while you're here with this clay, and get it rototilled in and smooth it out. And notice that flag in the middle. Those are flags for the sprinkler heads. You will have to flag all those sprinkler heads if they're existing, and then make sure that they're in the right order and the right size and everything else that they need. You will have to raise those up to the new soil level to ensure that you're getting adequate coverage with that. And there are some more irrigation classes later on in this series, so you can learn more about irrigation. But typically, once that soil is prepared and everything is smooth and leveled off and all the sprinkler heads are ready, you're going to lay sod. Why? Because even though it's expense at the beginning, this is instant lawn. Don't try to seed. I have so many people say they're going to seed. The only thing you're going to seed here is Bermuda grass, because that is the only warm season grass that you can get by seed. It has a very thick hull on it, and even the unhulled seed that you purchase is going to take 20 days to germinate. That has to stay solid, moist 20 days for it to germinate. And then you've just got to keep watering it in order to get it up to height to mow. Whereas this, once you have it all prepped and it's down, it is instant lawn. And actually, I will tell you that this was one of my neighbors, and this entire process was done in 3 days. They removed everything, they prepped the soil, and they had that sod out, and it was instant lawn. Notice the sprinklers are going in this picture, because the minute it is laid down, you do need to start watering it. You will have to water it. A lot of cities will give you a variance for doing this, to water it more than 2 days per week, but you don't water it that long for every single day, because you've got to get it to where those roots will go deep. And the only way you can make roots go deep is to starve it a little bit with water. You water deep, then you let it dry out a little bit, and then that forces those roots to start growing deep. Usually about the first 2 weeks, you're going to have to water it almost every single day. But what you'll see is that it'll take pretty quick. And how are you going to know? You're just going to reach down there and grab a piece of that sod and kind of tug on it. Don't tug hard, just tug gently, and you will see once you tug, and it's kind of a little hard to tug, the roots have started penetrating that new soil. But that is the reason why you want to prep it with compost, because it's going to penetrate that soil a lot faster with compost. All right, so that's what happens with the varieties. Now, what I said is that proper maintenance is the thing that people usually go wrong with. And proper maintenance is mowing, it's watering, it's fertilization. One thing with mowing is that you need to make sure you're mowing at the proper height for the turfgrass species. They don't all like 3-inch growth, no matter what anybody says. They all have a specific height that they prefer to grow at. You want a sharp blade, because as you have a sharp blade, you're doing less injury to that turf, and you're not promoting entry wounds for diseases. If you have a dull mower, you could put places where diseases can enter easily. Watering, this is a big thing. We've had lots of rain this spring, and I have seen neighbors with their sprinklers on twice a week since March, just because they can water twice a week. I have watered one time so far, and that was actually this week. And this week was the first time I watered. Most of the time, you do not need to water. And when we've had cooler temperatures that we've had this spring, then it doesn't evaporate quite as fast either. So you really want to think about watering in absence of rainfall, not just because you have a sprinkler system and it's easy to turn on. You can manage it with a lot less water than what you think. And then fertilize. Fertilize is extremely important, because it's proper timing and the rate. And you need to know what that turf grass needs. So let's talk about mowing heights. This is something that a lot of people don't talk about. But if you've got common Bermuda, the optimum growing is basically is about 1.5 inches. But it can go to 3 inches, but after it gets over 3 inches or even at 3 inches, it's going to start shading itself out. So if you could keep it at the 2-inch, that is probably best for your Bermuda grass. Now, the hybrid Bermuda grasses, those are things that are used like on golf course greens and soccer fields and things like that. They need a shorter mowing, and their optimum is 1 inch. And a lot of times on those fields and golf courses, they are mowed at a 3/4 inch or less and mowed with a reel type mower. And that makes the huge difference. Now, when you're mowing with a reel mower, you have got to make sure that your soil is level, or you're just going to keep scalping the lawn. St. Augustine is the grass that you can grow at 3 inch. So when you see something that says mow your grass at 3 inches, they are talking about St. Augustine grass. And if they're not talking about St. Augustine grass, they should be, because that is the grass that is optimum at 3 inches. You can let it go to 4, but the optimum is 3, and about the minimum is 2.5. If you have a combination of common Bermuda and St. Augustine, then you have to find the happy medium there. And so that's basically going to be at about a 2.5 to 2 3/4 of an inch. Zoysia japonica, that is what the zoysia with palisades, that is the variety for palisades. And it can be grown up to 2.5 inches, but its optimum is 1.5. Whereas Zoysia matrella, that is that Zeon, it likes that shorter mowing, just like the hybrid Bermuda. So people always say, well, how do I know what my mowing height is? Do I get out there with a ruler and I measure it? Also never remove more than 1/3 at the time when you're doing it. But people ask, well, how do I know? Well, everybody who has a mower has a owner's manual. And within that owner's manual, it's going to tell you notch 1 is mowing at such an height. It has a cutting height listed in that owner's manual. And that's what you're wanting to look at to see, where do I put these notches on the wheels to make sure I'm mowing at the proper height. Everything has a mower. Now, some of you may not be managing your own lawn. You might have a lawn service. Well, sometimes you're at the mercy of that lawn service, because they may have everything at a 3-inch height, and they may not be going to move it if you have Bermuda. So you just kind of have to find out about that. And a lot of times with lawn services, you are kind of at their mercy of when they fertilize, when they mow, and all you really have to do is water, and that's all you're doing. Well, remember at the beginning, mowing, fertilizing, and watering, it's like every time you fertilize, you're going to water more, which makes you mow more. So you need to be careful about lawn services, making sure that everything's kind of timed out. Now, I will tell you, this is not, if you are going to use a mulch blade on a lawnmower, this person waited too long to mow. Because if you're mowing at the correct height with a mulch blade, you are not going to have bales of grass on the side. And I will tell you about mowing. It is best to mow without that bag. You don't want a bag. You really want the mulch mower, to where you're mowing over and you're not having to collect the clippings. And the reason for it is those clippings have got nutrients in them. And every time you remove them, you're removing some of that fertilizer you just put down on that grass. And if you've seen the prices of fertilizer this year, you don't want to waste it, because it's gone very, very expensive. This person waited much too long, and he's decided that he just really doesn't want to get out there and mow anymore. So what does he do? He lets it grow up as tall as until the HOA says you got to mow, and then he mows it as short as possible. That is not how you're going to have a healthy turf. And typically when you mow like this, you're going to introduce diseases, insects, weeds, and other issues, and the grass is not going to be healthy. So you really have to mow when it needs to be mowed. And right now, think about our temperatures. Our temperatures the past 3 weeks have been in that optimum range, 88 to 92. When it's at that optimum time, it is also optimum growing, which means you can't go a week with mowing. I'm having to mow mine every 4 to 5 days right now. And with a lawn service, a lot of times you've got a weekly service. My neighbors try to do a 2-week service. It's not healthy for the lawn to go 2 weeks and then mow it. Right now, like I said, 4 to 5 days. Mine needs to be mowed today, and I'll probably be out there with the mower as soon as I'm finished with this tonight. So we'll get to watering. Now, this is the other thing, is that people tend to water almost too much, especially if they have a sprinkler system. If they have an in-ground sprinkler system, they tend to use twice as much water as somebody that does a hose and sprinkler. And the reason for that is because it takes so much time to go out there and drag that hose around and move that sprinkler. Typically, you're going to find people that do not have automatic systems only water once per week, just simply because of the time that it takes. Whereas those automatic sprinkler systems, people are putting it on their 2 days allowed week, and they just let it run no matter what, because they only get 2 days to water. 2 days is plenty to water your grass. Most of the time, this is a general rule and something that's been out there in horticulture for a very long time, that you need to water 1 inch per week. And I'm sure you've heard it. I'm sure you've seen it in writing, and even the master gardeners. Everybody will promote that watering once per week, and especially in the growing season. And then in the non-growing season, in the wintertime, you probably need 1 inch per month. And a lot of times they will promote that, but they don't quite tell you the whole story of that. They're telling you 1 inch per week, and that is up to 1 inch per week, because it doesn't necessarily need that much. But one thing that some people do not promote enough, and I saw this in particular this year, is for St. Augustine turf. In St. Augustine turf, there are some varieties that are less cold hardy than others. And you don't really know which variety you might have in your lawn unless you purchased it and installed it yourself. In that November to March period, sometimes you need to use your sprinkler, especially if you know that we're going to have a sudden drop in temperature, like what happened this past January. We were hovering in 50 degrees, and all of a sudden it went to 20. In that instance, in St. Augustine in particular, you can get some, they're calling it winter desiccation. They're calling it winter dryness. It is basically the roots were dry going into that cold, and it froze. Water does help to insulate it. So think about that. If you do have St. Augustine, you might want to water before a freeze. I saw it coming. I watched the weather. A week beforehand, they told us this freeze was coming. So at least 3 days before that, I made sure that my entire lawn was watered. Even though we had had some rain, I wanted to make sure it was watered, and watered deeply. Now, here is the reality about watering. Most of the time, you do not need a full inch. Now, this week in particular, with our upper 90s coming on, if we do not get any rain, which there is prediction for rain this week, but if we do not get any, then this might be a week that you might need 3/4 of an inch to a full inch. If we get no rain between now and next Tuesday, then it might need an inch. But what we really need to be looking at is how much rainfall are we getting according to and what the temperatures are, because those are the things that you're looking at. The last 2 days we've had a lot of wind. Those items tend to dry out items fast, and also rate that evapotranspiration rate up. And that is what that ET data is the evapotranspiration rate. And so over the past 5 years, typically it's been 3/4 of an inch or less. And a lot of times we haven't even need to use a sprinkler at all until July, August, and September. Now, each year is different, because look what's happened so far. We have gotten a tremendous amount of rain, and we really haven't needed it. but now all of a sudden we're going hot. So who knows what's going to happen between now and August. Last August in particular, from July 16th to September 9th, we had absolutely no rainfall, and the temperatures hovered between 100 and 105. That particular 6-week period, you needed an inch a week. And you say, oh, I can't do an inch a week. Yeah, you can. You can do it on 2 days. You can do a ½ inch both days. Now, again, with that St. Augustine in that winter time, it's best to water 24 to 48 hours before that big temperature drop, just to help ensure that it insulates those roots. I'm not saying it's going to 100% survive, but you'll have less injury by doing that. Now, how many gallons does it take to water my yard in 1 week? Because that's a lot of things that people talk about. Will it cost too much? Yes, it does. Water is expensive, and that is the reason why we want to conserve it. And we don't want to water every single day or both days a week, even though we're allowed. But just simple math. So for every 1,000 square feet of surface area, it requires 312 gallons of water to give a half. So that's quite a bit. So average lawn in a lot of these neighborhoods are 10,000 square feet. All of a sudden, that is 3,120 gallons just to water that ½ inch on the lawn. Now, that is for one watering. And typically, if you're going to do that and that's for a ½ inch. So if you're going to do a full inch, you can double that. In 4 weeks at a ½ inch, that's over 12,000 gallons of water used. And that's typically how you are billed. You are billed by the month. So you need to think about how many times am I watering each week so you can anticipate what that water bill might be. Now, sprinkler system, spray head and rotor head. One thing to know about these, if you're going to use these sprinkler systems, they put out rate different on each one. Those spray heads basically put out quite a bit of water. They can go anywhere from 1 to 2 inches per hour, whereas rotor heads are usually a ½ inch to 1 inch. Now, if you want to know how long to time your sprinkler in order to give a ½ inch, well, just take the average. The average of the spray head is 1½ inches per hour. That's going to take 20 minutes to provide a ½ inch of water. Whereas that rotor head, if we take the average of that, that's 3/4 of an inch. It's going to take 40 minutes to provide a ½ inch of water. Now, you're going to get a lot more on other sprinkler talks here, but just know this for your lawn. If you're wanting to give a ½ inch, it is better to give that whole ½ inch in 1 day than it is to split it out and just do 10 minutes this day and 10 minutes another. But you're going to have runoff on that clay soil. If you do 20 minutes for that spray head, you're going to have runoff that's going to occur in 7 to 8 minutes. So you're going to have to do what's called cycle and soak, and that means that you're going to have 2 to 3 start times with less minutes back to back. It is not a 6 a.m. and a 6 p.m. It's like a 5 a.m. and a 6 a.m. start time, to where those are back to back to split up that time and give enough time for that water to soak. And Water is Awesome has a lot more information on their website for this cycle and soak and basically how to do it. And they also have, if you sign up for their water advice weekly, they're going to tell you how many minutes you need to do on the average head, whether or not you have a rotary head, a rotor head, or a spray head. So there's a lot of information that you can get from that on how to water. So don't just go out there and turn that system on and just water just willy-nilly. Let's water how we need to so that we have healthy lawns. Now, fertilizer is another thing. Warm season grass uses quite a bit of nitrogen. Nitrogen is the highest thing that it needs. Typically, 1 pound of pure nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Now, low maintenance, you can get away with 2 times per year. And I consider all home lawns low maintenance, because low maintenance, you don't have the Dallas Cowboys over there practicing football. The high maintenance, that is going to be those football fields, those soccer fields, the golf courses, and things like that. A high maintenance may need 4 times and can get away with 4 times, but some of those lawn care services are going to sell you 6 times or more. But typically, if you're wanting low maintenance, remember, the more you fertilize, the more you have to mow, the more you have to water. So you can get away with 2 times per year, but timing is critical. May 1st should be the very first time that you ever put down a fertilizer application. And this year in particular, I waited till the 6th of May because it still wasn't all green and growing too much. If you do it before then, you're wasting fertilizer because you're feeding weeds and other things, not the grass, because it's not growing. Remember that optimum temperature, 88 to 92. October 1st should be your last application. You don't want to do it past October 1st because sometimes we get early frost. So if you insure an October 1st and you put it down late September to October 1st, you make sure that you've got the fertilizer into the grass to get it over the winter. So what you were looking at on that fertilizer bag, these are numbers. The first number represents nitrogen. Notice that this one has a higher number there than the others. 0 for phosphorus, and then this is potash. So we have a lot of phosphorus in our soils in this area, and you don't really need phosphorus. So use a slow release fertilizer in May, and you will see that on the bag. Here's very important. Read the directions and read that bag, see what it's made of. That slow release, by using it in May, it's going to get you through the summer, because once it gets really hot, you don't want to put fertilizer down anymore. You never want to do it before rain, even if the weather guy tells you to do so, because how our rains come here, a lot of times they're going to wash off, and you're going to wash that fertilizer right into the storm drain and pollute our water systems and not give a chance for the turfgrass to utilize it. And like I said, read all the label directions, because the label directions do tell you how to put it down, how to calibrate your spreader to make sure that you're putting it down at the right rate, and then any safety precautions that you need. More is not better. You wouldn't take 10 aspirins for a headache. You don't give more fertilizer to make it green. You use it as it's directed. In the spring, a lot of times you'll go to these stores and you'll see lots of chemicals out there on the shelf. And usually these start coming in February or March. It's a merchandising. It doesn't mean that you have to go buy it and use it at that time. But a lot of times people see this one product out there called Weed and Feed. They have a lot of dandelions, and so they say, oh, okay, I'm just going to buy this and I'm going to get rid of everything. I'm going to get rid of the dandelions, the clover, and fertilize my lawn at the same time. But just realize, again, I'm going to that optimum temperature. If you've got dandelions in February and March, your grass is not green and growing, because typically the temperatures are in the 70s. If it's not green and growing, it is not going to absorb that fertilizer. And you're putting a product out that is telling the plant, grow, don't grow. The fertilizer tells it to grow. The weed killer is a suppressant. It is a growth suppressant. So you're telling the plant, and also the grass as well, grow, don't grow. It's just not a good product to use. I would just say don't ever use it. If you have to use weed control, you want to use it separate from fertilizer. And typically it's going to be 7 days apart. So we don't have a whole lot of time to go into all of this, but I'm just going to briefly do this. These are your main lawn pests. Now, this is besides your dogs and kids, because they are usually the biggest pest of your lawn, especially dogs running the fence. However, these are the ones that people want to know about. Healthy lawns will be less attractive to any of these things. So if you get your lawn healthy, you should not have a huge issue with weeds, insects, and diseases. But if you do, and you want to use pesticides to get rid of them, which I don't really recommend, you need to identify the pest first, because if you don't know what the pest is, you may not be using the right control. Some of these pests, you basically don't do damage to the turf grass. So identify that damage. If they're mild, don't do anything. The grass will overcome it. And then identify the proper management strategies. Sometimes it is the use of chemical pesticides, but sometimes they're all alternative organic measures to do. And if you're going to use the chemicals, then just use the right ones. Here's 2 examples of weeds. The weed on this you probably know is dandelion. This one is crabgrass. The same weed control does not work on both of those. If the label does not say controls crabgrass and dandelions, then it's not a product to use. If you have grubs in there, that's going to be a different than this. This one is army worms. Army worms typically come in the fall. They only chew on the leaves, so therefore they're not doing a lot of damage to the lawn. Leave them alone, the birds will get them. The grubs, however, can do extreme damage to root systems, especially in July and August, and you do need to watch out for these. There are some alternatives, some biologicals that you can use if you do not want to use chemicals, but you need to learn about them. The adult of this is what's flying around by your patio right now, those May or June bugs, as people call them. That is the adult of the grub. This is the larva of it, and they are going to be hatching pretty soon with all of the flying that's happening out there. They typically don't start eating until July and August. And then diseases. Here's two examples of diseases. This one is brown patch. This one is take all root rot of a St. Augustine grass. Two different diseases cause different problems. This one pretty much can heal itself. It's going to come during wet periods, especially if you use high fertilizer, high nitrogen fertilizers. This one is take all root rot. It can be very devastating of the lawn and pretty much kill out the entire lawn within a season. So you need to know the differences of them and know treatment. There are some organic and natural treatments for these instead of using pesticides. But if you have to resort to pesticides, please read the label first. Take precautions, because even those fungicides that you see out there can be very deadly too. So be sure to read that label. So here's just a summary of this. And I know I'm 5 minutes over, so I'm hurrying real quick so you can see this as I'm just going to pop up here. All right, so fertilize 1 pound of nitrogen, slow release in May, quick release in October. Never fertilize until the grass is green and growing. What's that temperature? 88 to 92. Don't do it before rain. Don't use weed and feed. Always mow with the 1/3 rule. Use a sharp blade. And that means sometimes you're going to be mowing it every 4 to 5 days when it's an optimum growth time. Apply only the water necessary during active growth in absence of rain. And mulch mow, don't bag it. Diagnose the problems before you do any treatment. Don't just go throw chemicals out there. Use less chemicals and fertilizers if you possibly can, because you're keeping our waterways healthy by doing that as well. So one last thing is that I saw this picture was actually in my neighbor's lawn, and this was April, late April, and that's what the lawn looked like. This was that newly sodded lawn, by the way, that I showed you earlier. And they were very upset because they thought they lost it. Well, they didn't. I will tell you, it's all nice and green now because they've done some things to help manage it. But what caused this? Well, like I said, last July, August, we had no rain for 6 weeks with 100 plus. Chinch bugs and grubs were very, very active during that period. And then in January, we had that sudden cold snap that happened with temperatures below 25. And then April, average day temperatures were 75. And the average was 58, but we had many, many nights that were right at 49 to 52 degrees. So the grass just typically wasn't growing. People wanted to hurry up and grow it, but their lawn actually picked up after they fertilized it the second week of May and started just averaging watering. It has now filled back in. So anyways, that's things that you want to do. If you really want to know where's the best source for turfgrass and turfgrass management, go to the source, which is the Texas A&M University. They are our land grant institution for Texas. They do house all the extension and extension agents throughout the state. The website for turf is aggieturf.tamu.edu. And that is the best source that you can have for turfgrass management. I tried to get it in 45, but I'm sorry I went over. So with that, Heather, are there any questions that I can answer quickly?
Yes, and you're all good. You're still within time completely. Um, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us. I think it's great that you kind of put that recap at the end that really shows a concise view of like, here's what you should be doing, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's great. Um, we currently don't have any questions, so I'm going to give everyone a moment. So anyone, if you have a question for Gail after that, have a question about your lawn or anything that she talked about, go ahead and enter it now into the Q&A box, and we'll give you a moment to do that. Also, don't forget that there's a handout as well to download. So you can always download the handout for more information and for a recap of the information. All right, it looks like we are having some questions come in now. So, um, where do you get your lawnmower blade sharpened, or how do you sharpen it yourself, or what should you do to keep it sharp?
Well, actually, I take it to a place. You can look and see where lawnmowers are serviced near your area. A lot of them, they have a sharpening that where you can just take it and have the blade sharpened. I don't sharpen mine myself. I do take it someplace. I typically sharpen it twice per year. And that I have a mulch blade, so they do take extra care with that mulch blade. Now, once it gets to where it's a little bit, they've filed it down and they have sharpened it quite a bit. I do replace that blade. So sometimes you will have to replace the blade.
Okay. I know if you live anywhere near Fort Worth, I believe Fort Worth Shaver and Appliance will do the sharpening as well. So that's a tip if you live in Tarrant County. But I think, like you said, probably your local, appliance repair or maybe machine shop or something like that can do it. And then I've also seen the sharpening, I guess, kits maybe at,
Yes. Yeah, you
big
can
box stores.
sharpen it yourself. I mean, you can sharpen it yourself. I just don't.
Yep. Yeah, it might be easier to get somebody else to do it. I think when I've had mine sharpened before, it's pretty cheap too. Like it was like $20 or something like that. Like not
Yes.
a lot of money.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. That's a really good tip. I think that is probably something that a lot of us forget. Okay, next question here is about crabgrass. What is your best tips for getting rid of crabgrass? What should you do?
Okay. Well, first of all, identify it because my neighbors were pulling up what's called annual bluegrass in February and said it was crabgrass. So you got to know because if it's annual bluegrass and not crabgrass, you're using a different chemical. Now, I will tell you for me, I use pre-emergent herbicides on my lawn every single year. The timing of that is very critical, but I use a product that is rated for crabgrass. It also it has about 35 weeds listed on the label that it controls. So I'm a big fan of pre-emergent because it is a granular product, or you can buy it granular product, easy to apply and water it in. Timing is very critical, and remember it's that temperature. So crabgrass germinates at that 70 to 75 degrees. It's a warm season. So you want to make sure that your pre-emergents are put down way before it germinates because that's what it does, it prevents germination. So pre-emergents are exactly that. You have to put them down before the season. And there are cool season weeds and warm season weeds.
Okay.
It is in Turfgrass 101, a whole week's worth of lecture.
Well, I think that the first point that you made about making sure of what it actually is a really good point because I think that there's a lot of different things that people call crabgrass, right?
Right.
A lot of different types of grasses. And so Digitaria, I think, is one of them. Paspalum can be another one as well. So maybe referring to it right by its trying to find
Correct.
out what its real name is rather than just
Correct. And there's
crabgrass.
there's actually 3 different species of crabgrass that we have here in this area.
Yeah, there you go. So there can be a lot of different things. So definitely look up some photos online, right? And it can help to wait for it to start like putting the little bloom on so you can kind of see. It can be really hard to identify grasses without that for the average person
And
anyway.
yeah, unless you know. Yeah.
Right, unless you're an expert, then you got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
crabgrass typically doesn't grow in February, but it will grow the minute the temperatures get above 70.
Okay. Is it more of a fall type of
No, it's a
weed?
summer weed.
Summer weed. Okay.
Mhm.
Good to know. All right. Well, I think that is all of the questions that we have today. So, um, Gail, thank you so much for joining us. And again, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. And thank you, everyone out there, for joining us. And like I said, please check out savetarrantwater.com to look at some of the future classes that are going to be in this same Texas landscaping series. And we'll see you at those. Thank you, Gail. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.